The sound of polished heels echoed through the Grand Oak, a high-end restaurant nestled in the heart of Los Angeles, where candlelight flickered against marble walls, and every guest seemed curated for prestige. Tech moguls in tailored suits toasted new ventures. Influencers posed with gold leaf desserts, their laughter polished for their followers. In this world of curated perfection, one man stood out, not for extravagance, but for his complete lack of it. He wore a simple gray polo, soft with age, tucked neatly in his slacks. His silver hair was combed, but not styled, and his demeanor was calm, steady, and unbothered. He didn't pull out a phone. He didn't call attention to himself. He just sat in his usual corner booth, nursing a glass of whiskey with the quiet confidence of someone who didn't need validation. That man was Clint Eastwood. But to the restaurant's newest waitress, Rachel, he was just some underdressed older man taking up space meant for someone more relevant. What she didn't realize was that Clint Eastwood wasn't just a customer tonight. He wasn't even just a Hollywood icon. He owned the place, and the lesson he was about to deliver would become the most unforgettable moment in that restaurant's history. Before we go any further, take a second to support these stories of real class and hidden character. Hit subscribe and help us reach 1,000 subscribers. It means the world and helps stories like this find the people who need them most. It was a typical Friday evening. The Grand Oak shimmered with the energy of LA's elite. Rachel, fresh out of hospitality school and meticulously styled for her growing food influencer following, glided through the dining room with the poise of someone who thought she'd already arrived. She knew how to cater to the new rich, the ones who demanded custom lighting for their appetizer photos and vegan caviar alternatives. She also knew who didn't belong, like the man alone in her section who hadn't posted a single photo, hadn't ordered anything from the tasting menu, and had been sipping a basic house whiskey for the past hour. She didn't know his name. She didn't care to. Thomas, the longtime manager, watched from across the room, tension tightening his shoulders. He knew that look in Rachel's eyes. He'd seen it before: judgment, superiority, impatience. But tonight, it was directed at the one person who could undo everything she thought she knew. Miguel, a young busboy wiping down the next table, noticed it too. He froze mid-wipe, his eyes locking on Clint. Growing up, he and his father had watched every Eastwood movie. He'd recognized the man the second he stepped inside, but he said nothing. He wasn't sure if he should. Then came the moment. Rachel approached Clint's table with a practiced smile that stopped just short of reaching her eyes. Her iPhone peeked out from the pocket of her apron, always ready for the next Instagram-worthy plate. "Sir," she began, her tone polite but edged with condescension, "I couldn't help but notice you've been nursing that house whiskey for a while now." Clint didn't flinch. He looked up with the same calm gaze that had stared down villains and executives for decades. "It's a good whiskey," he said. Rachel pressed on, her smile stiffening. "Perhaps you'd be more comfortable at the bar. We're expecting several reserved parties for this section. These tables are typically for our dining guests." She gestured at the white tablecloth like it was sacred ground. Thomas took a step forward but hesitated. He could see the storm gathering. Miguel clutched his tray, torn between respect and instinct. But Clint just took another sip. "I'm comfortable here," he said simply. Rachel's brow twitched. She glanced at her watch, then at the door where a group of influencers and venture capitalists waited to be seated. She lowered her voice, but not enough. "Our executive chef prepares a very exclusive menu," she said, eyeing Clint's polo. "The prices reflect the caliber of our establishment." At a nearby table, an older couple, 20-year regulars, shifted in their seats. The husband opened his mouth to speak, but his wife placed a gentle hand on his arm. She recognized the look in Clint's eyes. She'd seen it before, on the screen, in silence, right before the final showdown. "I'm aware of the prices," Clint replied, his voice quiet, his tone unwavering. "And other chefs' work." Rachel's smile finally cracked. She pulled out her order pad, her motion sharp. "Well then, sir, shall I explain the menu slowly?" "Perhaps." The jab wasn't subtle. Miguel winced. He wasn't the only one. The tension in the room shifted, invisible but heavy, as if every crystal glass had stopped vibrating. "Miss Rachel," came a quiet voice, Miguel's. He'd stepped forward without realizing it. "Maybe I should get Thomas." Rachel didn't even look at him. "Go bus tables," she snapped. "That's what you're here for." She turned back to Clint, brimming with indignation. "Now, sir." One last time. People nearby had stopped pretending not to listen. The whole restaurant was caught in the slow unraveling of something none of them could define just yet. But they felt it. A lesson was coming. They just didn't know how hard it would hit. "This isn't some diner off the highway," Rachel said, her voice rising. "This is the Grand Oak. Maybe in your day, things were different, but we have standards now." Clint set his glass down. Slowly, deliberately. The kind of movement that made people lean in without realizing it. "In my day," he repeated, raising an eyebrow. "Yes, your day. When people could just walk in, dress however they wanted, order the cheapest thing on the menu, and take up space meant for real customers." A silence thicker than the expensive linen napkins fell over the room. Clint leaned back, that familiar half-smile playing at the edge of his lips. The room was watching now. Even the influencers had paused their selfies. What would he say next? And more importantly, what would happen to Rachel when she realized the truth? Back-end index pointing right, let us know in the comments. Where in the world are you watching from? We'd love to see how far this story travels. Modern luxury. Clint rolled the words around in his mouth like the whiskey he'd been sipping. His voice was soft, almost reflective. Modern luxury, he repeated, looking up at Rachel. "And what exactly does that mean to you?" The way he said her name made her flinch. She wasn't wearing a name tag. He hadn't asked. He just knew. That should have been her first clue. But Rachel recovered quickly, assuming he'd overheard someone else say it. "It means," she said, lifting her chin, understanding that not every place is for everyone. "Our clientele expects a certain ambience." She motioned toward the table of young entrepreneurs posing with their desserts like awards. They get it. They know what the Grand Oak stands for. They're not pretending to be something they're not. The irony of that sentence floated in the air like smoke, curling through the minds of the seasoned staff who were watching closely. Thomas was now only steps away, his face pale, his instincts screaming that this wasn't going to end well. Clint leaned in slightly, not aggressive, just deliberate. His half-smile faded into something sharper. "Pretending," he said softly. Interesting choice of words. Rachel, still oblivious to what was unfolding, rolled her eyes just enough to be noticed. "Listen," she snapped, her voice losing its false politeness. "I've tried to be polite, but you clearly don't belong here. This isn't a set for one of your old cowboy movies. This is a prestigious establishment. And I won't have you ruining the experience for our real guests." The words hit the air like a glass shattering on concrete. Thomas froze mid-step. Miguel dropped his bus tub with a metallic crash that silenced the entire restaurant. A gasp escaped from the older couple at the next table. Even the influencers had lowered their phones. Clint didn't blink. He simply reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and made a single call. "Jerry," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Could you bring me the ownership papers?" "Yes, right now. And the renovation plans we discussed last week." He ended the call and placed the phone gently on the table. Rachel's expression shifted. Confusion, then doubt, then panic. Clint met her gaze. "You see, Rachel," he said, "I've been coming here every Friday for the past 6 months. Sitting at this same table. Ordering the same whiskey. Want to know why?" She didn't answer. Couldn't. "Because 6 months ago, I bought this restaurant." You could have heard a pin drop. A fork paused midair. A wine glass trembled slightly in a stunned hand. Rachel's eyes widened, her breath catching as the realization landed with a crushing weight. "I didn't buy it for the prestige," Clint continued. "Not for the crowd it attracts. I bought it because for 50 years, the Grand Oak stood for something real. A place where hospitality meant treating every guest with dignity, whether they arrived in a Bentley or took the bus, whether they were a Rolex or a Timex." A ripple of emotion moved through the room. Jerry, the accountant, entered moments later with a leather portfolio. He handed it to Clint with a respectful nod and stepped back, his eyes gleaming with a private kind of satisfaction. Rachel stood frozen, her order pad limp in her hands. She had insulted a customer, Not just any customer, Clint Eastwood. And not just Clint Eastwood, her own boss. A living legend. A man who had made a career portraying the very values she'd just dismissed. "Miss," Clint said, his gravelly voice cutting through the silence with quiet authority. "Let me tell you a story about this place." He gestured around the room. 50 years ago, I came here for the first time. I wasn't famous yet, just a struggling actor. I wore a shirt a lot like this one. He tugged lightly at the collar of his polo. And the owner back then, Old Man Thompson, treated me like I was the most important guest he'd ever had. Not because of who I was, but because that's how he treated everyone. He paused, taking another sip of his drink. The way he held the glass, the way his fingers moved, somehow even that commanded respect. When his son wanted to sell the place, Clint continued, "I bought it to preserve that spirit. Because real class doesn't come from designer clothes or social media clout. It comes from respect, from treating people like they matter." Miguel, still standing nearby, straightened his shoulders. The older couple smiled knowingly. Even the influencers, surprisingly, looked moved, some putting their phones away entirely. "So," Clint said, locking eyes with Rachel once more, "the question isn't whether I belong here. The question is whether you understand what this place really stands for." Rachel's eyes shimmered. Her whole body seemed smaller, as though she wanted to disappear into the floor. Everything she had been taught in school, everything she believed about modern service and curated experiences, it was unraveling. Fast. But what happened next surprised everyone, especially her. And in the moment that followed, Clint Eastwood would show the world that true leadership isn't about power, but grace. If you've made it this far, you're clearly someone who values meaningful stories. Help us keep telling them. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Your support truly makes a difference. Rachel's hands trembled slightly as she clutched her notepad, her carefully constructed persona cracking beneath the weight of everything that had just happened. The whispers had started now, soft, stunned murmurs floating across tables. A few patrons were still frozen, watching with wide eyes, unsure if they were witnessing a reprimand or something much bigger. Clint Eastwood's voice softened, though it still carried the weight of 6 decades of leadership, character, and presence. "I could fire you right now," he said plainly, but without malice. "I have every right to. You insulted a guest. You embarrassed yourself. You embarrassed this restaurant. And you disrespected someone who, frankly, has been doing this longer than you've been alive." Rachel blinked rapidly, her throat tightening as a tear slipped down her cheek. But Clint didn't stop there. His eyes shifted toward Miguel, who was still standing like a statue, unsure whether to sit, run, or salute. "But that's not what this place is about," Clint continued. "That's not what I'm about." He turned to Miguel. "Son, what's your name?" "Miguel," the young man said, his voice quiet but steady. "You tried to warn her," Clint said, nodding slowly. "You saw what was happening, and you stepped up, not because it was your job, but because it was right. And you recognized me, didn't you?" Miguel gave a nervous smile. "Yes, sir. I've seen all your films. My dad and I used to watch them together. He always said, you reminded him of what a real man should be." Clint smiled, genuinely this time. "That's respect," he said. "Not about suits or followers. It's about doing the right thing when no one's watching." Then, in a move that would shock everyone in the room, Clint turned fully toward Miguel. "How would you like to start training as a waiter?" he asked. "This place could use more people who understand what real service means." Miguel's eyes widened. For a second, he looked around, unsure if he'd heard right. "Yes, sir," he said, his voice filled with disbelief and gratitude. "Thank you. I'd be honored." A few people in the restaurant started clapping quietly, not for the drama, but for the message. A soft wave of approval moved through the space. Older couples nodding, younger guests lifting their glasses subtly in acknowledgement. Clint turned back to Rachel, who was now visibly crying, her shoulders hunched in shame. "As for you," he said gently, "you have a choice." He didn't say it like a punishment. He said it like a teacher offering a final exam. You can walk out that door and find a job at another place that aligns more with what you think modern luxury means. You'll probably be fine. Plenty of places care more about image than substance. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. Or you can stay, learn, work under Miguel and the veteran staff. Understand what this restaurant was built on. Learn what hospitality really means. Not from a textbook or a hashtag, but from people who've lived it. Rachel's lips parted. She looked at Thomas, who hadn't said a word throughout all of this, but now gave a quiet nod of approval. She looked at Miguel, humble, hard-working Miguel, who gave her a look of pure compassion, not pity. And then she looked at Clint. I like to stay, she whispered, if you'll let me. Clint gave a single nod, the kind of nod that ended arguments in every Western he ever starred in. Good choice. He finished the last sip of his whiskey and set the glass down with finality. Thomas, he called without looking, Miguel's in charge of her retraining. Yes, sir, Thomas replied immediately, his voice cracking slightly with emotion. The tension that had gripped the Grand Oak like a vice finally lifted. Conversations resumed, though more quietly. The music picked up again, but the mood had shifted. The restaurant felt better, calmer, more grounded. The older couple that had witnessed it all started to clap again, this time more deliberately. Others joined in, not for celebrity, not for spectacle, but for the moment, the message, the return of something so many had thought was gone. Clint stood slowly, nodded to Jerry and Thomas, and turned to Miguel one last time. You'll do fine, son. Just remember, every person who walks through that door deserves your best. Doesn't matter who they are. Miguel nodded, standing taller than he ever had before. As Clint walked out of the restaurant, a few guests stood out of instinct. It wasn't about fame. It was about respect. And while the Grand Oak had once been known for its luxury, tonight it had earned something more valuable, its soul. If you believe respect is still worth defending, and dignity should never go out of style, go ahead and subscribe. These stories matter, and so does your voice. Outside, the Los Angeles night had settled in softly, with a warm breeze drifting through palm trees and traffic lights glowing like distant embers. Clint Eastwood stepped onto the sidewalk without ceremony, his presence still as unshakable as it had been inside. There were no paparazzi, no flashbulbs, just a few stunned patrons who watched him walk away like they'd just witnessed something more powerful than a movie. Back inside, the Grand Oak slowly returned to motion, but the energy was different now. Quieter, more thoughtful. Conversations were no longer about real estate and stock options. They were about what had just happened, about grace, humility, and second chances. Rachel sat in the staff corridor behind the kitchen, still processing the fallout. Her apron was folded neatly on her lap, her eyes puffy but open. Miguel walked in, carrying 2 glasses of water. He offered her one. She took it without a word. I've never seen anything like that, she said finally. Miguel nodded. Me neither. They sat in silence for a moment, the hum of the kitchen behind them like a gentle reminder that work went on. I didn't recognize him, she admitted. I was so focused on the influencers, the suits. I just assumed. Miguel finished the sentence for her, kindly, that he didn't belong. Rachel nodded slowly, ashamed. I thought I knew what luxury was. You're not the first, he said, shrugging. Almost fell into it too, when I first started. Thought maybe if I worked hard enough, dressed right, I'd be invited to those tables instead of clearing them. But then one night, I saw a man tip a dishwasher $200 because he noticed he was limping. No cameras, no audience, just respect. Rachel looked down at her hands. I judge him for a shirt. You weren't judging him, Miguel said. You were judging what you thought mattered. She turned to him. Why didn't you say anything earlier? I tried, he said with a small smile. You told me to go bus tables, remember? Rachel laughed quietly, embarrassed. Yeah, I remember. The staff room door opened, and Thomas entered, looking unusually serious. He looked at both of them, then addressed Rachel directly. You've got a lot to learn, he said. But if you're willing to listen, we'll teach you. You've got one of the best examples right here. He gestured to Miguel. Rachel looked over at him, genuinely moved. I'll learn. I promise. Thomas nodded and left without another word. Back in the dining room, the atmosphere had subtly shifted. There was less posing, less pretense. Even the table of influencers had moved on from gold leaf selfies to quiet conversation. One of them, a woman in a silver dress, leaned toward her friend. "That was Clint Eastwood," she whispered. "He didn't say much, but wow." Her friend nodded. "I don't even care about old movies. But that was something else." At the bar, Jerry the accountant sat, sipping club soda. He looked over at Thomas, who joined him after making sure everything had settled down. "He handled it better than I would've," Jerry muttered. Thomas chuckled. "That's why he owns the place." "You think she'll make it?" Jerry asked. "Rachel." Thomas glanced toward the kitchen. "Time will tell. She's got the tools. Just needs to get out of her own way." "And Miguel?" Thomas smiled. "He's the real deal. The kind of employee you build a legacy on." From the corner booth, the same booth Clint had just left, an older gentleman who'd quietly observed the entire evening turned to his wife. "You know," he said softly, "this place used to mean something. Tonight, it felt like it did again." His wife smiled and reached for his hand. "That's because someone reminded us. Someone who didn't need to say much to say everything." In the back hallway, Rachel and Miguel stood up. The night had shifted, and so had she. "You ready to learn how to fold napkins the hard way?" Miguel asked, grinning. "Lead the way," she replied. As they stepped out onto the floor, something subtle changed in the room. Not because they were noticed, but because they weren't. They were just part of the team now. And that's what mattered most. The next Friday, Clint returned. Same polo shirt, same slacks, same corner booth. Miguel approached, a new server's apron tied tight around his waist, confidence in his step. "Good evening, Mr. Eastwood," he said warmly. "The usual?" Clint smiled. "You got it." And in that moment, everything felt exactly as it should. If you're enjoying this story, consider subscribing. These moments, small but powerful, deserve to be remembered. And we've got plenty more to share. The following weeks brought subtle but meaningful changes to the Grand Oak. There were no flashy announcements, no rebranding campaigns. But anyone who stepped through its grand entrance could feel it. Service felt warmer. The staff moved with a new rhythm, efficient but genuine. Veteran waiters who once kept to themselves now found themselves mentoring. Even the front desk host, who used to prioritize followers over friendliness, began greeting every guest with the same sincerity, whether they wore designer or denim. And at the heart of it all was Rachel. She arrived early now, not to check her makeup or rehearse her influencer pitches, but to set tables with care, learn wine pairings, and memorize more than just the menu. She studied the regulars. She asked about their preferences, their stories, their names. The shallow confidence that once defined her had been replaced by quiet, attentive purpose. Miguel trained her without ego. He didn't gloat, didn't hold the incident over her. Instead, he taught her with the same humility that had always guided him. How to read a table without intruding, how to sense when a guest needed a moment, how to listen without judgment. One afternoon, during a lull between lunch and dinner, Rachel and Miguel found themselves polishing glasses at the bar. The light filtered in through the front windows, casting golden beams across the room. "You know what I used to think?" Rachel asked, wiping a stem glass. "What's that?" Miguel replied. "I thought luxury was about exclusivity. Velvet ropes, name-dropping, VIP lists." Miguel nodded. "That's what most people think. But now," she paused, watching the dust swirl in the sunlight. "Now I think it's about presence. Making someone feel seen, respected." Miguel smiled. "You sound like Clint." She laughed softly. "I'm trying to." That evening, Clint arrived right on time as always. The usual corner booth, the same casual polo. And as usual, no fanfare. He didn't demand anything. He never had to. Rachel approached with Miguel beside her. Her heart thumped in her chest, not out of fear this time, but out of respect. "Mr. Eastwood," she said with a small smile. "Welcome back." Clint looked up, nodded once, then turned to Miguel. "How's she doing?" he asked. Miguel grinned. "She's listening." Clint nodded again. That was all he needed. Rachel refilled his glass of whiskey, placed it down gently, and stood back. "Thank you for not firing me," she said. Clint looked at her for a long second, then answered the only way he knew how. "Everyone deserves a second act," he said. Those 5 words would stay with Rachel for the rest of her life. Elsewhere in the restaurant, Thomas observed it all from his usual post near the bar. Jerry, the accountant, leaned in beside him. Think she'll make it long-term? Thomas watched her clear a table with care and thanked the guests with sincerity. She's already made it, he replied. By now, word had spread about the night Clint Eastwood revealed he owned the Grand Oak. Guests came hoping to catch a glimpse, not just of the man, but of the spirit he'd reignited. Some came to see if the story was true. Others came because they wanted to be part of a place that still believed service wasn't about status, but sincerity. One Friday, a father and his teenage son walked in, both wearing plain polo shirts. They asked the host if they could sit where Mr. Eastwood usually sits. The host smiled and guided them to a booth nearby. Not Clint's exact table, but close enough. They weren't celebrities, and they weren't trying to be. They just wanted to share a moment of what the restaurant had become. Real, quietly noble. Later that night, as Rachel and Miguel helped close the dining room, she looked around and said, "It's not just a restaurant anymore, is it?" "No," Miguel said. "It's a story. And like all great stories, this one had its turning point, its heroes, its lessons, and most of all, its heart." Before we share the final part of this story, if this message has touched you in any way, consider subscribing. You help us keep these timeless values alive, and you make sure stories like this don't disappear in a world full of noise. The Grand Oak, once known primarily for its luxurious decor and influencer appeal, had transformed into something rarer, a space where dignity and authenticity were celebrated without pretense. Word of mouth brought in new faces, not because of hype, but because of hope. People wanted to experience the place where an ordinary evening turned into a powerful reminder of timeless values. Clint never advertised his ownership. He never made a speech. He never even put his name on the building. But every Friday, without fail, he sat at his usual corner table. Sometimes he spoke with staff. Sometimes he nodded to returning guests. Most times he just sat, sipped his whiskey, and watched. And that was enough. One evening, just after the dinner rush, Rachel finished serving a quiet couple celebrating their anniversary. As she returned to the service station, she caught a glimpse of her reflection in the mirrored panel behind the bar. Her posture was different now, no longer trying to impress, but simply present, grounded. She turned toward Clint's table and hesitated. Then, gathering a breath, she approached. "Sir," she said gently, "I was wondering something." Clint looked up, eyes calm and kind. "Did you always know who you were going to be? Back when you were first starting out, before all the fame, before all the movies. Did you already know?" Clint chuckled. That familiar, gravelly voice warmed now. "Hell no," he said. "I didn't have a clue." Rachel smiled, surprised. "But you became you. I didn't become anything," he said, swirling his glass slowly. "I just kept showing up, kept doing the work, kept treating people right. The rest followed." He paused for a beat, then added, "Don't let the noise tell you who you are. Let your choices do that." Rachel nodded, her eyes misting. It wasn't just advice, it was a gift. Nearby, Miguel wiped down a table. He'd grown more confident in his new role, more sure of his place. He moved with a quiet pride, the kind that didn't need to be seen to be felt. One of the veteran servers walked past him and whispered, "You've got the Clint walk now." Miguel laughed. "I've still got a long way to go." "Yeah," the older man said, "but you're on the right path." That night, as the lights dimmed and the last guest left, Clint stood up from his table. Rachel and Miguel were near the door, preparing to lock up. "See you next Friday," Clint said simply. "Looking forward to it, sir," Miguel replied. "Always," Rachel added. As Clint stepped out into the night, the wind gently tugged at his shirt. He paused, glanced back at the restaurant, and smiled. Not because of the building, not even because of the food, but because the spirit he remembered from 50 years ago, the spirit of humility, of respect, of real service, was alive again. Inside, Rachel turned to Miguel. "Do you think people like him are rare?" Miguel thought for a moment. "I think people like him are everywhere. They just don't always speak up. But when they do, they remind us who we're supposed to be." The camera could fade to black there. The music could swell. The story could end. But it doesn't. Because every day, somewhere, someone is judging by appearance. Someone is choosing style over substance. Someone is forgetting that a smile matters more than a status symbol. And someone, just like Clint Eastwood did that night, is choosing to stand up quietly and make it right. The Grand Oak still stands, not because of marble floors or curated menus, but because of its soul. And if you ever find yourself in Los Angeles on a Friday night, stop in. You might see a man in a gray polo shirt, sitting in the corner, sipping whiskey, and quietly making sure the old values still live on. If this story moved you, if you believe that kindness, respect, and humility still have a place in this world, hit that subscribe button and join our growing community. And click the card on your screen right now to watch another powerful story about second chances, unexpected grace, and the people who remind us what it means to lead with character. Thanks for watching.